There's a body language sign she can't fake when she wants you. Not the hair touching, not the eye contact games. Something deeper, something her nervous system does automatically when she's attracted. And most men miss it completely because they're too busy analyzing the wrong signals. What psychologists discovered about the body language of genuine desire, the signs she literally cannot control. Before we go deeper, think of the last time you couldn't tell if she was interested. That anxious replay of every interaction, searching for proof. Got it in mind? Good, hold that feeling. Because what I'm about to show you will reveal why you were looking for the wrong signs. And what you were actually afraid of finding now. Here's what nobody tells you. Every time you obsessively scan her body language for validation, you're guaranteeing she'll pull away. Not because you're doing it wrong, but because the seeking itself is the problem. And if you don't understand this, you'll keep repeating the pattern, mistaking polite tolerance for desire, chasing women who were never really there. Have you ever noticed how she tilts her head just slightly when you talk? How her pupils dilate when you lean in closer? How her breathing changes when you're near? Have you ever caught her staring at you when she thought you weren't looking? That split second before she glances away, before the mask comes back up. What about the way she touches her neck, her collarbone, her wrist? When you're telling her something that matters, why does her body orient toward you, even when she's pretending to be interested in something else? And here's the darker question. Why do you need to know? Is it because you genuinely want to understand her? Or is it because you're terrified of getting it wrong? Terrified of investing in someone who sees you as a placeholder while she waits for something better? Have you ever felt that hollow ache when you realize she's just being polite? When the signals you thought were interest were just basic human decency? And you confused kindness for desire? Why does that hurt so much? Why does being just friends feel like a verdict on your worth as a man? What if I told you that the body language signs you've been looking for, the ones that supposedly reveal her attraction, are only half the story? What if the real question isn't, does she want me? But why do I need her to want me so badly? What if her body language is actually a mirror, reflecting back the parts of yourself you're most desperate to validate? Here's what's going to happen in the next 18 minutes. I'm going to show you the body language signs that actually matter, not the clickbait nonsense, not the if she touches her hair she likes you garbage. The real signals that separate genuine desire from polite tolerance. But more importantly, I'm going to show you why you're looking for these signs in the first place. And that second part, that's the part that changes everything, because there's something backwards about reading her body language that nobody tells you. The harder you look for the signs, the less accurate your reading becomes. Stay with me, because this reversal changes everything you think you know about attraction. Stay with me. Let's start with what you think you know. You've been taught that attraction has a formula, that if you can just decode the signs correctly, you'll know whether you're wasting your time or not. You've read the articles. You've watched the videos. 7 signs she's into you. Body language secrets women don't want you to know, and some of it's actually true. There are body language cues that reveal attraction. Pupil dilation, mirroring, proximity seeking, preening behaviors. These aren't myths. They're documented patterns rooted in evolutionary psychology. But here's what nobody tells you. Those signs don't reveal what you think they reveal. Surface level. You're learning to read her body language so you know if she's attracted to you. Deep level, you're learning to read her body language because you don't trust your own value enough to act without evidence. Do you see the difference? One is about understanding human behavior. The other is about managing your own terror of rejection. Let me show you what's really happening. When you obsess over whether she touched her hair or leaned in, or held eye contact for 3 seconds instead of 2, you're not trying to understand her. You're trying to protect yourself. Because if you can decode the signs early enough, if you can know for certain before you make a move, then you never have to risk actually being rejected. You never have to put yourself out there and hear, "I'm not interested." You never have to face that crushing moment when you realize you read it all wrong. Have You ever found yourself analyzing every interaction afterward, replaying conversations in your head, searching for proof that she likes you? Why do you need so much evidence? What are you afraid will happen if you just express interest without certainty? What if rejection isn't actually what you're afraid of? What if it's something so much darker you've been hiding from it your entire life? Here's where we start going deeper, into the psychology beneath the psychology. Carl Jung talked about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we can't accept, so we project them outward onto others. And when it comes to reading her body language, most men are actually reading their own shadows. You're not seeing her desire. You're seeing your need to be desired. You're not noticing her interest. You're measuring your own worthiness of interest. Every glance, every touch, every micro-expression becomes a referendum on whether you're enough, whether you matter, whether you're the kind of man a woman actually wants or just tolerates. And here's the thing that's going to sound harsh but is absolutely true. She can feel that neediness. Not consciously, maybe, but her body picks up on it. The desperation in how you track her every movement. The way you light up when she gives you attention. The way you deflate when she doesn't. That's not attractive. That's not magnetic. That's the energy of a man who's outsourced his self-worth to her validation. Have you ever noticed that the women you want most are the ones whose body language you scrutinize most carefully? The ones whose signals you need to decode with absolute certainty? What about the women you're not that invested in? Do you obsess over their body language? Or are you just present with them? Why is it easier to be yourself around women you don't want? What changes when you care about the outcome? There's something deeper here, something about desire and validation that we need to examine before we can talk about what her body language actually means. Because the truth is, you already know if she wants you. On some level, you can feel it. The question is whether you trust that feeling, or whether you need her body language to confirm what you're afraid to believe about yourself. Here's the truth you don't want to hear, and I mean that literally. Your body is going to resist what comes next. The reason you want to read her body language, the real reason, is because you don't believe you're inherently desirable. I know that hurts to hear, but stay with me. Think about it. If you genuinely believed that you were the kind of man women naturally desire, would you need to analyze whether she touched her hair? Would you need to decode whether her feet were pointing toward you or away from you? No, you'd express interest and see what happens. You'd be present. You'd be authentic. You'd let the connection develop naturally instead of trying to engineer it based on signs and signals. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is that you're trying to manage your own anxiety by creating a system, a way to know before you risk, a way to avoid the pain of putting yourself out there and discovering you're not wanted. And here's the shadow truth that lives beneath all of this. You're not actually afraid of her rejection. You're afraid that her rejection will confirm what you already suspect about yourself, that you're not enough, that you're fundamentally unworthy of desire, that the version of you that exists right now is not the version women want. Have you ever noticed how much mental energy you spend on this? The hours of analysis, the replaying of interactions, the searching for proof that she's interested. What are you trying to escape by staying in your head like that? What feeling are you avoiding by intellectualizing attraction instead of experiencing it? Why does uncertainty feel so unbearable? What happens in your body when you can't tell if she likes you? That tightness in your chest, that obsessive thought loop, that compulsive need to check her Instagram, to read the last text exchange one more time, to find some evidence that you're not wasting your time. That's not love. That's not even attraction. That's anxiety masquerading as interest. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine two men meeting the same woman. The first man is hyper-aware of everything. He notices when she laughs at his jokes. He tracks whether she's making eye contact. He analyzes her body language, cataloging every sign that might indicate interest. When she excuses herself to the bathroom, he replays the conversation in his head, searching for mistakes. When she comes back, he adjusts his approach based on what he thinks she wants. He's performing, managing, controlling. The second man is present. He's interested in her, yes, but he's not attached to whether she's interested back. He asks questions because he's genuinely curious. He shares stories because they're relevant, not because he's trying to impress her. When she laughs, he enjoys it. But when she doesn't, he doesn't spiral. His energy is stable, grounded. He's not trying to decode her body language because he's too busy actually connecting with her. Which man do you think she's more attracted to? The first man thinks he's being strategic. He thinks that by carefully monitoring her signals, he's increasing his chances. But what he doesn't realize is that his monitoring is the problem. His hypervigilance broadcasts insecurity. His neediness creates the very distance he's trying to prevent. The second man isn't trying to read her body language. And ironically, her body language toward him is far more open. Because she feels safe. Because his presence isn't demanding anything from her. Because he's not making her responsible for his self-worth. Here's what depth psychology teaches us. What we seek in others is what we've abandoned in ourselves. If you're desperately seeking evidence of her desire, it's because you've lost touch with your own desirability. If you're obsessively reading her body language for validation, it's because you've stopped validating yourself. If you need her to want you before you can feel worthy, you've given away your power. But here's where it gets really dark. Most men never see this next layer because it destroys the story they've been telling themselves since childhood. And here's the part that's going to feel like a punch to the gut. She knows. Maybe not consciously, but her body knows. Her nervous system picks up on your nervous system. And when you're in that anxious, seeking, validation-hungry state, her body responds by creating distance, by closing off, by showing you exactly the lack of interest you're most afraid of. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your fear of not being wanted literally creates the dynamic where you're not wanted. Have you ever noticed that when you're certain a woman isn't into you, you relax around her? And sometimes, that's when she suddenly becomes interested. What changed? Not your looks, not your status, not your game. Your energy changed. You stopped seeking. You stopped performing. You stopped making her body language a referendum on your worth, and in that space, actual attraction became possible. Think about the times in your life when you felt most attractive, most magnetic, most desired. Were you obsessing over body language signs? Or were you just grounded in yourself? What does it feel like when you're not seeking validation? When you're just present, just here, just alive in the moment without needing anything from anyone? Why is that state so rare? Why do you slip out of it so easily when you're around someone you're attracted to? Here's the shadow truth you've been running from. You don't actually want to know if she desires you. You want to know if you're desirable. And you're trying to answer that question through her body language because you're terrified of what the answer might be if you look within. But her body language can't answer that question. It can only reflect what you already believe about yourself. If you believe you're desirable, you'll interpret ambiguous signals as interest. If you believe you're not, you'll interpret even clear signals as politeness. The body language you're reading is your own, and once you understand that, everything changes. Which brings us to the paradox, the truth that resolves everything I've said so far. The reason you clicked on this video in the first place. Here's the paradox. The moment you stop needing to read her body language is the moment her body language becomes undeniable. Let that sit for a second. Remember the open loop from the beginning? I told you that most men miss the signs completely, that they're so obsessed with decoding her words that they miss the truth written in her body language. Here's what I didn't tell you. The men who actually notice those signs are the men who aren't looking for them. Think about it. The unconscious body language cues that reveal genuine desire. Pupil dilation, proximity seeking, mirroring, open posture. These aren't conscious performances. She's not choosing to do these things. Her nervous system is responding to your nervous system. And what does her nervous system respond to? Presence, groundedness, a man who isn't seeking anything from her. A man whose worth isn't contingent on her validation. When you're desperately scanning for signs, you're in your head, you're anxious, you're performing, and her body picks up on that anxiety and contracts. She becomes more guarded, more careful, Her body language closes off, giving you exactly the signals you were afraid of. But when you're present, when you're grounded in your own value, when you're genuinely curious about her without needing anything from her, her body relaxes, opens, responds. The signs you were looking for suddenly appear. Not because you learned to decode them, but because you stopped needing them. This is the paradox of desire. You can't manipulate attraction. You can't decode your way into someone's heart. You can only create the conditions where attraction becomes possible. And those conditions require you to stop seeking it. Have you ever experienced this? Where you stopped caring, and suddenly she became interested. It felt like a game, didn't it? Like some weird backwards psychology where the less you care, the more she wants you. But that's not what's happening. You didn't stop caring. You stopped seeking. You stopped making her attraction a measure of your worth. And in that space, your actual essence emerged. The version of you that's attractive not because you're performing, but because you're real. Here's what this means practically. Yes, there are body language signs that indicate attraction. Sustained eye contact, mirroring your movements, finding excuses to touch you, orienting her body toward you even when she's talking to someone else, laughing at things that aren't funny, playing with her hair or jewelry when you're speaking, leaning in when you lean in, asking personal questions. These signs are real, but they're not checkboxes. They're not evidence you collect to build a case. They're emergent properties of a genuine connection, and you can't create a genuine connection while you're anxiously monitoring whether a genuine connection exists. Do you see the trap? Now here's where everything I've said connects, and it's going to sound impossible at first. The very act of seeking certainty destroys the possibility of what you're seeking. You wanted to know the body language signs so you could be confident. But confidence doesn't come from external validation. It comes from internal groundedness, from knowing your worth, regardless of whether she sees it. And when you have that groundedness, you stop needing the signs. You stop obsessing over whether she touched her hair. You stop replaying conversations. You stop managing and performing and controlling. You just show up, present, authentic, interested but not attached. And that's when her body language becomes obvious. Not because you learned to read it better, but because her body is now showing you what you stopped demanding to see. This is the part where everything I've said connects. The human truth, the shadow work, the reframe. You're addicted to being wanted because you don't believe you're inherently worthy of wanting. So you seek evidence in her body language. But that seeking broadcasts unworthiness, which creates the very rejection you fear. The moment you reclaim your worth, you stop seeking. And the moment you stop seeking, the evidence appears. The body language you've been trying to decode was never the problem. Your relationship with your own desirability was the problem. And her body language was just reflecting that back to you. What if her body language isn't something you need to read, but something you get to witness? What if the question isn't, does she want me, but am I being someone worth wanting? Not in a performing way, not in a what do I need to do way, but in a presence way, an authenticity way, a groundedness way. What changes if you stop trying to extract validation from her body language and start offering presence instead? So where does this leave you? You came here wanting to learn the body language signs that reveal if she wants you. And I've given you something harder, something that requires actual transformation instead of just information. But here's the thing. You can't unknow what you now know. You can't go back to obsessively analyzing her body language without recognizing what you're actually doing. You can't scan for validation without seeing your own neediness in the act. You can't seek certainty without understanding what that seeking costs you. So what do you do instead? First, you practice presence, not as a tactic, not as a strategy to make her attracted to you, but as a way of being that serves you regardless of what she does. What does presence feel like? It feels like being in your body instead of your head. It feels like listening to her because you're genuinely curious, not because you're waiting for your turn to impress her. It feels like being okay with silence, being okay with not knowing, being okay with uncertainty, Can you be in a conversation with her without tracking whether she's attracted to you? Can you express interest without needing evidence that it's reciprocated? Can you be yourself without monitoring whether that self is enough? This isn't easy. Your nervous system has been trained to seek safety through control, to manage rejection by avoiding risk, to protect your worth by only investing where you have proof of return. But that's not living. That's not connecting. That's not how attraction actually works. Second, you reclaim your worth from external validation. This is the shadow work. The uncomfortable truth-telling. Sit with this question. If she's not interested, what does that mean about you? Really feel into it. Don't intellectualize. What comes up when you imagine expressing interest and being rejected? Where do you feel it in your body? What story does it confirm about who you are? That story. That's the wound you've been trying to avoid by reading her body language. And until you face that wound, until you see it clearly and recognize it as just a story, not truth, you'll keep seeking validation outside yourself. What if her rejection doesn't mean anything about your worth? What if it just means you're not compatible? What if not interested is information, not judgment? How would you show up differently if you genuinely believed that? Third, you let her body language be what it is, not evidence, not proof. Just information about what's happening in this moment between two people. If she's leaning in, touching you, maintaining eye contact, great. That's a signal that she's comfortable and engaged. But it's not a guarantee. It's not a contract. It's just this moment. If she's distant, guarded, closed off, that's also just information. Maybe she's not interested. Maybe she's had a terrible day. Maybe she needs more time. Maybe she's attracted but afraid. You don't know, and you don't need to know. What you need to do is be authentic. Express your interest if you feel it. Create opportunities for connection. And then, let her meet you there or not. That's it. That's the whole thing. Not because you're playing it cool. Not because you're pretending not to care. But because you're genuinely grounded enough in your own worth that her response doesn't define you. Have you ever considered that the most attractive thing you can offer isn't confidence or status or looks, but freedom? The freedom for her to be herself without you needing her to validate you. The freedom for her to choose you or not choose you without it destroying you. The freedom for connection to develop naturally instead of being engineered. That freedom is only possible when you're not seeking, when you're not managing, when you're not trying to decode her body language to avoid the risk of being yourself. Here's your challenge. The next time you're with someone you're attracted to, notice when you start scanning for signs. Notice when you slip into your head, analyzing, seeking validation. And in that moment, come back to your body. Feel your breath. Feel your presence. Ask yourself, what would I say or do right now if I wasn't afraid of rejection? Not in a reckless way, not in a screw-it YOLO way, but in a grounded, authentic way. What would genuine interest look like if it wasn't contaminated by neediness? Try it just once. Be present instead of performing. Be curious instead of strategic. Be real instead of safe, and notice what happens. Not in her body language, but in yours. Notice how it feels to show up without seeking, to connect without controlling, to desire without demanding. That feeling, that groundedness. That's what attraction actually looks like. Not the signs you're reading, the state you're embodying. And when you embody that state consistently, her body language becomes irrelevant. Not because you've stopped noticing, but because you're no longer asking it to answer questions only you can answer. Does she want you? Maybe, maybe not. But the real question is, are you grounded enough in your own worth to find out? Because the man who needs to know before he acts never gets the answer he's seeking. But the man who acts from groundedness, regardless of the answer, discovers he was already enough all along. That's the paradox. That's the truth. That's what was buried beneath your obsession with reading her body language. You don't need better sign-reading skills. You need deeper self-trust, and once you have that, everything changes, not just with her, with all of them, with life itself, because you're no longer seeking validation. You're no longer performing. You're no longer trying to decode your way into being loved. You're just here, present, grounded, real, and That's what she's been waiting for all along, the version of you that shows up without needing anything from her. The version that's interested but not attached. The version that can hold space for connection without collapsing into neediness. That's the man whose presence speaks louder than words, whose energy creates attraction instead of chasing it, whose body language she can't help but respond to, not because you learned the signs, but because you stopped needing them.